Hi there, I'm Mike with Crane Realty, and today's video we're going to discuss what you'll need to do before writing your offer. Now I know for a lot of my agents when they reach out to me they say, hey Mike, I want to learn to write an offer. Before kind of putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, it's really important all of the necessary information that you'll need to gather and your process and how you're going to go about gathering that information is all very important. A lot of times they'll say, I spoke with a client and we saw a property, they want to write an offer, what do we do next? And then I start by saying, are they pre-qualified or are they cash? Meaning, so are they essentially financially credible? Have we had that conversation yet? Well, yes, they're using a VA loan. And then we'll back up further. Does the property qualify for a VA loan? So there's all of this initial gathering of information that you're essentially going to have to refine the process for your buyer, getting them to the point of saying, okay, yes, all of the ducks are in a row and we're in a great spot. So there's going to be a part one, which is the video today, which is gathering up all of that information. And then once all of that information is gathered, a part two, sitting down in front of the computer and then drafting it up, getting it sent out to your buyer. They're going to e-sign it and then you present it or send it to the listing agent. So that's a part two. This is part one. So without much delay, I'm going to get right into it right now. So before writing the offer, part one, the very first step, the client's finances. So on that initial phone call or conversation, you're going to get to a point where you're going to talk about that person's financial credibilities, right? You're going to ask them if they've gotten pre-qualified or if they're planning on using cash. So you'll need to know what those details look like. If it's a conversation where they say, no, we haven't talked to a bank yet, but they're interested in a property, still go see that property with them, build that rapport with them, give them that one, and help them along the way so they could start feeling that you're invested into their search, which is important. So our brokerage policy, we always encourage, just get that first showing, whether they're pre-qualified or not. But are they pre-qualified? Meaning, is the bank already financially backed them? They've went through their debt to income ratios and they've determined the right loan type, what their ceiling is, and all of this stuff. That pre-conversation with a lender is really important. I always tell my clients there's really two parties helping you purchase a property. So myself as a realtor, I'll be scheduling showings, we'll be getting in, seeing properties. Once we find one, we're going to be writing on one. So I'll draft up the offer for you. And then once we get an accepted offer, I'm going to be helping that paperwork move forward till closing. On the Reader's Digest version, that's what I'll be doing as a realtor. On the flip side of that, there's a loan officer, somebody who's going to be evaluating, your finances and everything, and then determining the best loan product for you. They're going to be figuring out, working with your budget and what you have, what essentially all of that looks like on the finance end. It has a direct correlation to the home search. We shouldn't be looking at 400K properties when you only finance up to 250, right? Things like that. And certainly the loan type plays into that too, which I'll get into in just a second. You'll be asking them questions such as, do they need seller's concessions? Usually on their pre-qual, if they send it to you, it'll say somewhere on there that they need 6%, sometimes at 3%, just kind of depends. Or you might get a conversation in with the lender. Sometimes you could tell if it's an FHA, USDA, or a VA loan. At times, you'll have a client that needs to pivot and utilize some seller's concessions, which is essentially a fancy way of them financing their closing costs. They're not actually getting help from the seller necessarily. So easy numbers, if you have a 100K purchase price and they need to finance 6,000 or 6% in seller's concession, so that would be 6,000. The seller is agreeing to net 94,000. So in a sense, yes, they're coming down. You can use it as a negotiation tool. You can try to build that 6% over the asking price of 100K. So your offer would come closer, 6% plus on top. So it would be a little north of like 106K you would be writing, then 6% times that. So you can kind of see how that works out. And if they're utilizing a USDA loan, so that's a United States Department of Agriculture loan, that is location specific. So if I were to go over here and bring up a new tab for a second, and then click on one of my saved links, you can actually see there's a website. It'll say whether something's eligible or not. You just click that you agree to the terms. I'll enter the address of the office real quick. Main Street, Canandaigua. Oops. Let's get that part right. New York, 4424. So you can see right there in the city, that should be a dead giveaway. But I'll say in the city, this property is not eligible. Now, if it was out in this other township areas, that would fall within agriculture. That should be perfectly fine. Oh, I see my mistake there. That, so still got it. Perfect. So if you wanted to pause the video and write this down, or at the very least, bring up a new link and write all of that down and then save that tab for yourself. It took me several links just to get to that page, and that's kind of the doorstep to getting that eligibility part of it. So just save that on your computer or your browser, and then the next time you have a client that's like, I'm not really sure, again, a dead giveaway if it's in the city. It's cities, obviously that's not going to work, but if you want to be sure, you can punch in the address into that site and you'll see for sure if it is or does not qualify. The next part is evaluating the property. So we understand their finances and what that looks like. We can then pivot and see how those finances correlate directly to the property, right? So on the property, it might say something to the effect of, let me just bring up a property here. I'll scroll down. So for this one, possible financing, cash only, and I'm not sure why the agent did that, but cash and conventional only is what they're willing to entertain as far as possible financing for this property. Some others might say that it would be willing to look at all of them. Sometimes it says just cash only. That means that they don't have any confidence in the property appraising out at all. So you would have to be a cash only buyer at that point. So it's worth taking a look at possible financing. Every now and again, you might have a listing agent, maybe they're inexperienced or just seeing the world as a very optimistic, like, hey, I'm pretty sure it'll appraise out. It's like, no, I went through the pictures and you have a detached garage with peeling paint all over the place, and you put down VA or USDA, and it's definitely not going to appraise out. So it's really important to know the different types of loan types and how it correlates with the possible financing. Reviewing the owner just really quick. It's nice to know, is it a bank owned? Is it an estate? If it's one of those two, then there's not going to be a property condition disclosure, right? Quite possibly if it's a landlord, sometimes they like to say I've not lived in the property, but they should still fill one out. Realtors, or if they're related by any chance, so sometimes a realtor is also on the other side of their deal, so they might be more invested than just what their contract says. Sometimes they actually have some skin in the game with the outcome of this property, so you're really communicating directly with the seller, not just viewing them as a listing agent for that property too. Or is it more of a traditional sale, right? Somebody who's lived there and they know the condition of the property and everything, just more of a traditional sale that way. So it's good to know that information and share that with your clients, you know. Reading the private remarks, there's always good details there. Is there delayed negotiations, or maybe there's no delayed negotiations? If a property pops up and your clients say, hey, we're free this coming Tuesday, and you're like, well, it's Thursday. They have delayed negotiations due Monday. You got to let your client know that. They don't want to see the property after everyone's already seen it and written their offers. They're going to be behind the 8 ball. So it's up to you to bring them up to speed and help them with that. So seeing if there's delayed negotiations is important. If there's not, and it's a first come, first serve, maybe that creates more urgency to get in and see it today or tomorrow. So you're conveying those different pieces of information, usually under the private remarks. If there's any type of special notes, if the property is being sold as is, maybe it's a seller that's just financially strapped and they know that there's some improvements, and they're just saying, hey, look, you can test things, you can do any type of inspections you want. We're strict. We are selling it as is. Sometimes it's like that, and there's not something, just because you see as is doesn't mean that there's something absolutely catastrophic with the home. So sometimes people see as is and they think bad things. So, but just try to keep that in mind. That's not always the case. Or they might allude to the property needing flood insurance. Perhaps it's close to like a swampy area, water, the canal we have. So flood insurance, that's actually pretty expensive. Usually it's like $100. I've even seen like closer to 200 depending on the severity of it and the how expensive that property is. If you wanted to see for your own knowledge the property specifically, and let me scroll up here. If you wanted to find, well, how do I see that just on a map, flood insurance wise? So bringing up this property as an example, you saw where I clicked on this little map icon above the pictures. On the MLS specifically, when we're looking at the listing, you could click on the map and then click layers. And there's all this other really great information, but right now we're just going to look at flood and click back on layers to get rid of that. So all these areas over here, no need for flood insurance. Over here, floodway, this property specifically would have to have flood insurance. So important to know. Certainly would want your clients to see that. Okay. All right, scrolling back down here. All right. Also on the MLS, when you're looking at the property, this is all online information, right? So you're looking at attachments maybe. There might be a radon test. Usually it's only good radon tests, right? Like they pass, that everything's good. So they might boast that they have a radon test results. So that might be up there. So maybe your folks don't want to test for it. If it was something that was recent within the last couple of years, you could say, hey, you know what? Save yourself $100+. They already did it. Are you okay waiving it, or do you still want to test? It's up to you. And provide them that information. Again, you as a realtor, a large portion of your role is providing information. You're not here to twist anyone's wrist and come off as some sort of salesperson convincing people to do things they don't want to do. They already know they want to buy a house. That's easy. Now we're just giving them and relaying information in a really tactful way that they feel comfortable taking those next steps. You can see if there's a checklist of any type of improvements. There's also the property condition disclosure. So with regard to the property condition disclosure, you get to see the age of a whole lot of things, which is really good. It'll go through any type of known defects about the property. So if you do see anything, it's good to know that, right? You don't want to get them set on like, oh, I'm really excited about this property. And then you're like, hey, they mentioned that there's whatever type of issues that might be there. And then you're conveying that to your client. And they're like, oh, now we've cooled off on it, but we got emotionally invested over the last couple of days about it. If you can, take a peek at that PCD. It's a nice thing to do, especially prior to seeing a property, because sometimes you'll get asked the question, what do you know of this home? And you're like, well, I'm not the listing agent. I've never been here before. I don't know anything about the house. But you're gonna have that moment, where either the clients or the client's parents ask you that question. This is your opportunity to actually be the professional and be like, actually, I do have some information about the property. That's why I always carry my tablet, because I can, off the cuff, bring up the attachments and be like, actually, I do have some information about it. If you want to, we're outside right now. If you want to know the age of the roof, it's 5 years old approximately, is what the seller wrote. And you can just see how you naturally just fall into credibility with your client, which is a good thing, versus being like, well, I don't know, but I'll write that question down. At the very least, you could say that, but it sounds a lot better giving them the answers right there on the spot. And then reviewing the pictures. It's usually like 30 some odd pictures. Just go through, see if there's anything that you're noticing that you're like, you know what, something's a red flag here or a miss. This is mostly based off of the premise of this is like your first time working with them. Maybe it's your third showing and you know for a fact that there's a certain thing that they need to see. Maybe it's a finished basement or something. Or if there's something that you find that's going to trigger that appraisal, in order for the property to appraise out in condition, maybe that's going to be an issue, right? So certainly take a look at the pictures, see if there's any type of red flags. Those are always good suggestions and things that you should be doing. After that, step 3, while at the showing, I understand neither yourself or me, we're not home inspectors, and this is not our opportunity to pretend that we are. We need to operate within our skill set, right? Old car ethics, we need to still operate within our means of what we can do. But you don't need to be a home inspector to see a broken window, a garage that has chipping paint, or the house does, 3 or more steps that are not accompanied by a handrail, missing shingles. There's a handful of things, and over time you're going to see more and more things that will flag a VA appraisal, a USDA appraisal. Those are 0% down, so no down payment for the buyer. The bank is taking on 100% of that risk. And when they say that, they're like, well, we need to see the property set at a certain standard. If we're going to finance 100% of this risk, it needs to be up here. Conventional is like, well, you're fronting 20% down, so we're only taking on 80% of the risk. We need to see the standard a little bit lower. It needs to be right here. That chipping paint, that's fine. That broken kitchen window, that's fine. 3 or more steps without a handrail, that's fine. That's what it kind of comes down to. The appraisal is not an inspection, right? They're looking out for the best interests of the bank, and they just want to make sure this asset that the bank, not you as the buyer, the bank is acquiring, technically, and through that process, they want to make sure that it's going to be a good acquisition for them, and that it's not a distressed property or something, right? So while you are at the property, you're going to be looking out for certain things. Is there any type of, on the outside, you could be looking for water and how the behavior of water is working. Is the downspouts getting away from the foundation? Do you see trenches or a negative grade going towards the foundation, right? Do you see moss and mildew growth up on the roof, on the shingles? Do you see broken windows? Rotten sills, just a wood rot, a bunch of different things. Again, you don't have to be a home inspector, and you shouldn't theorize and make it a bigger problem than it is, but you also want your clients to know and see these things too. You don't want to be on the final walkthrough and for them to be like, I didn't realize on this side of the house these window sills were all rotting. Like, well, I noticed them, but you should have noticed them. Just kind of point them out in a casual way, just have a conversation about it. Just be like, hey, you know what, at this price point, there's going to be a lot of homes that are going to have some of these things. There is a way to fix it. Do you have anyone handy in your family that can take on something like that? Or is that the 2 of you? Is that something that you like to do? And you can have conversations, and just, again, you're helping them try to understand and get to how do they make this house. They're hiring you to essentially help them find a house and close on it. And you're not going to be the hero helping them do that. You're certainly not going to do your job if you scare them off of every single house. You're like, all right, I guess the only right house for you is a $500K brand new build. And you're like, well, we're only good up to $140K. You know, you're not helping them. So you got to kind of walk through that process and be tactful as you do it. You could discuss personal property that's there. Again, bringing the sheet of paper, or at least a tablet. I like to do a tablet. You'll be able to review the listing, look at the personal appliances that are there, or a personal property that they're willing to include from the seller. If there's a dehumidifier or AC window units that might be possibly included as well. And then the next step is going to actually be getting ready to write, right? So perform this next checklist, and I'll bring it up right now. So when you're done with the showing, they're going to say, hey, this is great, we like it, we want to talk more over dinner or whatever. Or maybe they say right in the driveway, agent so-and-so, we're ready, we want to move forward, we want to write an offer. And you're like, oh, this is great. And there are more cars pulling up after you, and they're wanting to see the property. I tell my clients, hey, you know, go on home, have dinner. When I get back to my home office, I'm going to give you a call. We're going to coordinate via text. I'll call you up, and then I'm going to go through a checklist, and we're going to have a conversation about drafting up your offer. This is the information right here in front of you, this offer checklist that you're going to need to have all filled out before you sit down at your computer and start writing. Okay? And it goes a little something like this. So this offer checklist, and I actually, from pen and paper, all of these criteria pieces on the side here on the left, I actually just know them by memory and can write it all down. When you're a little bit more of a seasoned vet, in the summertime especially, you're just going to be filling all of this information out. The worst is when you're like, oh, I forgot if they want a home inspection or not. Do not write that offer and send it to them. That's an important thing. You got to get back on the phone with them. That's why I have a checklist, because this is all the criteria that I need in order to write an offer. So you're not going back to them like 6 times asking them questions. Well, target closing date, you're waiving pretty much everything. We could do 45 days, or do you want to do 60? It's not really up to you to be making those selections. You're here to advise them, certainly, and saying how the certain optics of their offer and the terms that they're going to be putting in, how that comes off to the seller and the listing agent, and what they might be thinking, and maybe what they're also getting from the competition if it's a hot property. But this is an opportunity for you. When you get them on the phone, you're going through this checklist, and you could see that you could do buyer 1, and then the next day, maybe it's the same people, maybe they didn't get it and they'll do another offer. So for all my offers, I just go through this checklist until the sheet of paper is filled out. Save this piece of paper, folder it, put it away. There are going to be times, perhaps, and you know from your ethics classes and legal classes with GRAR, they're always encouraging you, anything that's written down, that's proof, that's going to protect you. Keep that type of information. Certainly keep this. You're going to have it written down anyway. So keep this information, which is important. So you'll put their name, you'll put their date. And sometimes if you're, 3 weeks removed, sometimes it's nice to refer back and be like, oh, you know what? I know who you were planning on using last time. And sometimes it's almost a copy and paste over to a new offer that they're writing, okay? So you'll go through the date, the loan type that they're planning on using. Sometimes you can look from the pre-quote letter and you can determine what the down payment is and so on. The escalation, and I should write the escalation factor. There we go. So the ceiling amount and then the factor amount that they're planning on doing. It depends on the price. I always encourage, if they're willing to go and utilize an escalation, first of all, it really needs to be something that's north of 10K. And it depends on the price point too. If it's like, especially for a 250, 300K and up, escalating it by 10,000 is just a rounding error. I know that just sounds like these big brash terms, like you don't really respect their money. I've been at the table with sellers when they're talking about money, and when they're looking at a cash offer who's waived everything and your offer that has this weird, yes, we're willing to give you your asking at 300K and escalate up to 10K, and we're doing it in $1,000 increments. You're only going up over this cash offer by $1,000 and you're out 301 and you're conventional 20% down, you just will not win. Because they want cash. They're going to close faster. There's no appraisal in condition. There's no appraisal in the value. So all of those factors, all those contingencies get thrown out the window. Cash is king. Cash just works that much better. That's why you got to get really aggressive on your escalation sometimes. Call me directly if you want a little bit more coaching with regard to escalations, because it's a little bit more on a spectrum. Certainly if we're talking about a 100K property and within their financial credibility is what they're able to do, maybe they're only pre-quilled up to 130. What that looks like and the increment number that they'll be using, maybe it's only like 3K. Maybe 3K is going to be good enough. But when we start getting into higher price points, we're certainly using different numbers. The optics are going to be completely different. The numerics are going to be greater, and they're going to escalate up quite a bit. So there's social norms in real estate, and if you're going to be writing for the first time on a 400K property, for example, and you're suggesting them, well, my last offer did 1,000 and that worked for them, it won't work this time. So just kind of keep that in your mind. Feel free to give me a call. because we've kind of been all over that spectrum, and certainly would be happy to share kind of where I've found success and what the kind of that social norm is. At the very least, you kind of want to be really impressive to the seller or be enticing. Just try to be enticing. If it's something that's a head scratcher where they're like, this means nothing, then it was a missed opportunity. Because I've had other buyer's agents call me up and say, hey Mike, we were willing to escalate to the highest. We were willing to go, I'm like, first of all, how do you know that? But you're telling the truth somehow. Yes, you were willing to escalate to the highest, but you were only willing to do it in 2,000 increments in your FHA. And my folks really like conventional, and they know that the backside of their house where it faces the sun, it's peeling paint all over the place. Conventional is going to look the other way on it, and they're happy to move forward with that offer instead. So it's those kinds of things that really those are the nuances, and that's what's part of the conversation for the seller and the listing agent when they sit down and review offers. The next is the price. So you got to get the price from them. Or the overall purchase price. That's kind of your floor number. That's where you're starting. If they happen to use an escalation, then you're talking about a ceiling number, and that escalating or that factor number that goes into play. Seller's concessions, if they don't need it, just move on. If they do happen to need it, again, you'll get that information from their loan officer. Your client might mention it. Bring that up in a kind of a tactful way. Say, hey, did your loan officer mention if you needed seller's concessions at all? If they do, great. If they don't, that's fine. Just make sure you hit that, especially for an FHA, VA, and USDA loan in particular. Conventional, they're usually coming out of pocket with some pretty good substantial savings, so typically they don't need to also do seller's concessions. There are some banks with some conventional loan products that will do like 3%. Deposit amount, bare minimum, again, what is the socially acceptable numbers and things and terms in the market? 1 to 2% at a minimum. So easy numbers, if it's 100K, they're going to do 1,000. You could try to pull off 500. It's weak. Is anyone super upset at the end of the day if they lost or walked away from $500? If they acted outside of the terms of the contract, they woke up one day and they're like, what, screw New York, let's go to Florida. They're acting outside of the contract, they would lose their deposit. Well, 500 is, I'd be upset. I'm not happy losing $500, but it's not going to keep me up at night past that. If it was 1,000 or more, you're starting to show that you have skin in the game. And this is a term too. If you have a financially credible buyer who, let's say if they're going to put 20% down, it's a little weird to be like, no, I shouldn't have to convince you to do 1%. You're trying to buy $250,000 of a property and you only want to do 1%. We really need to be closer to 7,500 or something like that. 5,000, 7,500, 10,000. Obviously, anytime with numerics you increase it, it's just going to look that much better. So 10,000, it would be applied towards their closing costs anyway. By the time they close, coming out of the escrow amount can be applied towards those things. Ask them if they want to do a home inspection, and ask them if they want to do a radon test. There's other things too to test for specifically, like chimney, pests and termites and so on. The home inspector should be looking at least those types of vermin kind of things and stuff. Say, oh, I see a nest, I see certain type of beetles that are boring into these support structures of wood, so on. Home inspector is going to be kind of looking and gathering that information anyway. With regard to like radon specifically, that's an important thing to ask. If you don't know, radon is a harmful gas. It comes from under the Earth's crust, and it kind of follows the path of least resistance. So as more homes are digging holes, creating essentially a hole in the ground, and then as we create tighter envelopes, which are helping these properties to essentially seal up all of those gases and things, it's making it difficult for those gases to escape. So if you're spending a lot of time down in the basement, you might be exposed to this type of harmful gas. And it's the #1 leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers. So it's definitely something that you don't want to expose yourself to, or at least certainly high levels of. The EPA draws the line at 4.0. Past home inspection, look at the property, see if it's connected sewer and water. If it doesn't have one of those things, you need to be asking the next line here, does it have a septic? If so, do we want the seller to pay for it? Do we want you to pay for it? The only time where you would have the buyer paying for it is perhaps it's super important to them. They don't feel comfortable waiving it, but it's really competitive. There's like 4 or 5, 7 offers coming in on this property, and we want the property, so we're going to take on the home inspection or the septic inspection. So there's a spot on the form you can pivot and select seller or buyer. Just really make sure that you ask them. If the property has been on the market for several days, the social norm is that the seller will pay for it. Okay, it's their waste, it's their stuff, and it's no guarantee that we're going to close. So it would be kind of nice for the seller to pay for it, and that is usually the social norm. If it's a well, you're usually testing for potability, is what it's called, safe to drink. Sometimes test for volume as well, which would be a good thing to do. Again, gives the option for the buyer or the seller to test for it. Target closing date, usually a common norm is 60 days for closing, 2 months, or if they're waiving everything and you have a lot of confidence in the loan, the lender, possibly, and it depends on if it looks favorably too. In private remarks, maybe the seller says, hey, I'm not going to move out of here until 3 months from now. You're like, okay. So putting 45 days would actually be a really bad thing. So you need to make sure you hash that out with your buyer and figure out target closing date, does this work for you? Or if they have a whole ton of contingencies, maybe you kind of need to build in some time and figure out that target closing date. You reiterate to your client too, it's a target closing date. This is where all parties involved have an important role to play, and we're all aiming for that date. Sometimes it falls before, sometimes it falls after. Just anticipate. Movers are used to being scheduled, not super in advance. So we don't want you to schedule anything. We're going to be in touch with you and we'll work through that. Are they selling contingent on their home that they're currently living in? A whole nother can of worms there, but that's an important question. Is there a pre-quote letter or the proof of funds, or how they're going about the purchase? Are they selling their home? Do they own it outright? Do they still own a mortgage on it? Do they need to, with the asset of the home selling contingent, also need to be financed? So it just kind of depends. That's an important one, and in part 2 we'll get to a little bit more of what that looks like. Appliances, basically I like to just copy and paste. I go right over here. Let's see if they have it. Here we go. So appliances, and then I just go right across here and get all the appliances that are mentioned, and then I copy and paste them. And of course, anything that you talked about at the property too. Hey, they have a dehumidifier downstairs. Is it super competitive? Maybe we can include it. Sometimes buyers don't realize that AC units, dehumidifiers, those are devices that cost like $100, $200 plus bucks. I mean, you're trying to help them, and certainly there's some moments where the sellers are like, oh, that's fine, they can have it, and your buyers will appreciate it. So appliances, what attorney to use, certainly would encourage any type of real estate attorney. A real estate attorney, both the attorney, their paralegals, all they do is real estate. The transactions that go the smoothest are usually with those attorneys. The ones where it's like, man, this isn't a smooth transaction, it's from when they're using a family member who's more familiar with litigation, or they're using someone who's like divorced, scratching, and so on and so forth. It just gets a little ugly. Certainly want somebody just on a daily basis, what all they're doing is real estate transactions, so they're super familiar. We like Christy Miller's office, Seneca Falls, Steve Peterson's office, Rochester. Those are 2 good ones to start with. Just Google their names, get their contact information, and you put it in the admin page. Any other notes or certain things to make mention of? There are certain times in the private remarks where they might use the phrase buyer to accept pre-existing survey. So there's a way in which that you would actually be writing that into the offer. A bunch of other details, but there's space right there that you could kind of write that little contingency out. And again, you would do each one of these columns for each one of your buyers every time they want to write an offer. I've had evenings where I've written 3-4 offers in one block of the night. When you get really good and refined, the conversations, you should have them. If it's their first time ever writing an offer and they're a first time buyer, they might want to talk to you for like 40 minutes just going through this list. If it's something where they've written 5 offers, you could probably get this you can get all this information in less than like 3 minutes. They're like, Mike, it's going to be the exact same offer as before, but here's the new numbers. You know, and then you can start seeing the value of being like, I printed this out. This is nice. I held it, just like Mike said. It's in a folder, and you know, you're pulling that information. So this kind of wraps up the video of part 1, writing an offer, or essentially before writing an offer, gathering all of that information. So hopefully this information was helpful to you. If you ever need to, always feel free, give me a call directly. I'd be happy to help you, you know, going through any questions that you have about this. Next video is going to be addressing writing an offer part 2, where we actually take this information now and then we get right into drafting. So hopefully you'll see that one next. Take care and best of luck out there. Bye-bye.